them. The world of hunters first presents itself as complete. It seems to have enough seas, enough countries, enough laws, enough borders, enough ruins, enough wild places, and enough mystery to feel like a finished map. You can wander through examinations, through towers, through cities, through islands, through wars, and through kingdoms, and the world still appears coherent. It appears vast in the ordinary human way, meaning large enough to matter, but still small enough to be named. And then, very quietly, the series begins to take that certainty away. The first true opening comes on the World Tree, when King finally meets Gon face to face, and peels the edge of the world back just enough to let something colder through. The tree Gon climbs is not the true, ultimate version of its kind at all, but only a young specimen, a sapling that stopped growing because it lacked the nutrients of the outer world. King then explains that real world trees rise beyond the known world, and that chimera ants also come from that outside realm, a truth not taught in school. That revelation is one of the most beautiful pivots in the series, because it does not feel loud, it does not arrive with an explosion or a war cry or a final boss stepping through smoke. It arrives like a larger silence being introduced into a smaller room. The known world does not vanish, but it immediately changes shape. What felt like a whole planet becomes an enclosure. What felt like a total map becomes a protected interior. The emotional effect of that shift is hard to overstate. When a story tells you the world is larger than you thought, it usually means there is more adventure waiting. When Hunter x Hunter does it, it also means that everything you already feared may have belonged to the safe part. The old dangers do not become unimportant, but they become local. They start to feel like storms inside a harbour, rather than hurricanes at the edge of a continent-sized wilderness. That is the first mood this script should preserve. Not excitement alone, but the unsettling reduction of scale. The dark continent matters because it makes the known world smaller in a very intimate way. It tells you that human civilization has mistaken familiarity for mastery. It suggests that our maps have always carried a polite lie inside them, and that the lie endured only because most people never climbed high enough to hear it being corrected. Once that idea settles in, the whole series begins to acquire a second atmosphere. Magical beasts stop feeling random. Ruins stop feeling isolated. Certain powers stop feeling merely strange. Even the phrase outside world begins to carry a kind of acoustic chill, because it does not mean a faraway country or an island over the horizon. It means an surrounding reality, one so much older and wider than the human basin of life, that the human world itself can be nested inside it, like a child's drawing left in the corner of a much older house. So the best way to begin this ASMR episode is not with a monster or a lecture, but with the gentle undoing of a map. You begin with the familiar world resting under moonlight, calm and named and bordered. Then you let the listener feel that world tilt. You let the sea become a lake. You let the tallest tree become a young tree. You let one conversation held high above the clouds turn all prior confidence into something softer, smaller, and more temporary. And once that rearrangement is complete, the dark continent can enter not as a sudden threat, but as the oldest fact in the room, finally noticed. Origins. The dark continent is older than human comfort, older than human geography, and older than the stories humans tell themselves about being central. Ancient artifacts and surviving myths imply that humanity's ancestors originally came from that outer land, and the same is speculated of magical beasts. In other words, the dark continent is not merely an external wilderness. It is, in a deep and almost humiliating sense, ancestral ground, the place from which both wonder and catastrophe may have entered the human story. But if it is a beginning, it is a beginning that civilization cannot revisit safely. The record humanity leaves behind is not one of steady exploration. It is one of repeated collision. According to the expedition history explained in the setup chapters, the V5 established an inviolability treaty roughly 2 centuries earlier after repeated disasters, formally prohibiting travel there. Even with that taboo in place, the number of later attempts rose into the hundreds, and the survival record remained almost absurdly thin. 149 attempts, only 28 survivors across 5 successful voyages, and only 3 people able to return to ordinary life after post-expedition evaluation. Those numbers matter less as statistics than as mood. They tell you the dark continent is not dangerous in the adventure story sense, where danger means challenge, hazard, and heroism. It is dangerous in the ecological and existential sense, where the environment itself seems to reject your categories. Survival is not common enough to normalize. Return is not common enough to make memory trustworthy. The place remains outside civilization, not because it is merely far away, but because contact with it is structurally hostile to the kind of being humanity currently is.
And still, even that does not tell the whole story. Because the path to the Dark Continent is not just long, it is controlled. One of the most eerie pieces of the lore is the existence of the guides and the gatekeepers. Human beings cannot simply decide to sail there by courage, wealth, or stubbornness alone. A successful voyage requires a guide summoned by the gatekeeper, a magical being intermediary connected to the route itself. The world beyond the known world is not simply geographically remote. It is guarded by a boundary that insists on permission. This is the point where the history darkens into something even stranger. Prior official expeditions did not come back with simple injuries or with a few frightening stories. They came back trailing what later chapters call the 5 great calamities: Prian, Ai, Helbel, Bap, and Zobe. The lore around them is structured less like zoology than like archival trauma. Each calamity is tied to an attempted human retrieval of something precious, and each return reads like an answer the continent forced into human hands as punishment, warning, or lesson. The other great ancestral shadow at the edge of this history is Don Freaks. More than 3 centuries before the current story, he is said to have travelled the shoreline of Lake Mobius and written Journey to the New World, a travelogue in 2 editions, East and West. Only the East edition is known to survive. Jing's most haunting theory is not that the West edition was lost or abandoned, but that it remains unwritten only because Don may still be alive and still travelling, perhaps aided by the abnormal resources of the Dark Continent itself. That possibility transforms Don from a historian into a ghostly ideal of frontier endurance. Then there is Isaac Nettero's undocumented trip with Zig Soldic and Lynn Orstovra, which exists in the lore like a bruise rather than a full story. The manga does not unpack every detail, but it tells us enough to matter. Nettero had seen the place himself. Beyond later ignored warnings and returned by an unexplored route. The result was catastrophic, and Nettero's response was to help make Dark Continent travel effectively taboo for the Hunter Association. This is one of the arc's most important tonal facts. A man defined by his pursuit of difficulty reached a place whose scale and nature made him value prohibition over challenge. That is the origin story pulse you want in the recording. The Dark Continent is not simply the next place. It is ancient pressure, broken memory, forbidden return, and unfinished authorship. It is a place that keeps surviving in books, bones, and institutional fear, long after it should have faded into myth. And because it does not fade, it turns curiosity into its own kind of inheritance. Major factions. Once the Dark Continent stops being a rumour and becomes a public project, the lore changes temperature.
it stops being only prehistoric, haunted, and archival, and becomes political. That shift matters because it does not make the continent smaller, it makes humanity more revealing. The question becomes not just what the Dark Continent is, but what kinds of people would use it, sell it, inherit it, weaponize it, or stake their names on being seen closest to its door. That transformation begins with Kakin's announcement. In chapter 340, the Zodiacs learn that the Dark Continent is off the ordinary world map, that past human attempts to go there only brought disaster, and that Kakin has publicly hired Beyond Netero to lead an expedition anyway. The shock has two layers. First, the impossible scale of what is being proposed, and then the revelation that the face of that proposal is Isaac Netero's hidden son. Beyond is not introduced as a quiet researcher or a humble explorer. He enters the story as a catalytic figure, someone who understands that public ambition is itself a weapon. He speaks not only to institutions, but to the dream people have of leaving the old world behind. The result is immediate pressure on the political order, because Kakin turns the Dark Continent from a sealed taboo into a public horizon, and the V5 can no longer treat the meta as a private meta of prohibition and classified fear. The Hunter Association, and especially the Zodiacs, become fascinating here, because they are forced into a role that is both administrative and mythic. Netero's second recorded message makes the stakes explicit. Beyond had already gone once, brought back new threats, and must not be allowed to outpace the association to the frontier again. Cheadle accepts the request, meaning the association is no longer just responding to a crisis. It is being compelled into a race with history itself. Then the diplomacy grows stranger still. Kakin's political position, the V5's treaty framework, and the sheer impossibility of openly blocking the voyage all push toward compromise. The result is the V6 arrangement, and one of the arc's most quietly sinister facts. The public destination and the true destination are not the same. The vast passenger project is officially framed around a dark continent voyage, but the masses are actually being carried to the new continent, a border-adjacent stepping stone, while the true expedition beyond that remains controlled and restricted. In other words, humanity still cannot approach the outside world honestly. It must disguise the frontier inside propaganda, spectacle, and layered permission. The black whale becomes the perfect symbol for that contradiction. It is monumental, almost absurdly large, able to carry around 200,000 people, and publicly framed as the vehicle of a civilizational turning point. Yet it is also a sealed atmosphere of hidden motives. A king sees a legacy in it. Beyond sees access in it. The Hunter Association sees containment in it. The public sees hope, migration, and spectacle. The listener, if the script is doing its job, should hear all of those motives moving together
like different currents inside one dark ship. This is also where the arc acquires its special ASMR texture. Most shonen escalation gets louder as it rises. The dark continent setup gets quieter. Meetings matter. Recorded messages matter. Books matter. Custody matters. Committees matter. Faction drift matters. The map becomes dangerous not just because monsters live outside it, but because humans begin rearranging themselves around the chance to touch that outside. And that rearrangement reveals how fragile their ideals were all along. By the time the black whale is preparing to sail, what you are really hearing is not the sound of a departure. It is the sound of a sealed world opening, one lock at a time. Key events. The 5 great calamities are the deepest reason the Dark Continent feels fundamentally different from ordinary adventure terrain. They are not set-dressing monsters. They are the law's proof of incompatible contact. In the chapters that explain them, the tone does not resemble battlefield hype. It resembles institutional horror. Steiner is led through underground evidence. Ruined bodies are displayed. Journey to the New World becomes a technical manual of suffering, and the returned threats are treated less as enemies to overcome than as categories of catastrophe that humanity was lucky not to fully unleash upon itself. Even their names feel wrong in a useful way. Brion, I, Hellbell, Bab, and Zobei do not sound like one coherent family of creatures. They sound like pieces of broken language from 5 different nightmares. The official summaries tie them to different returns and different resources. A botanical weapon, a gaseous life form, a twin serpent, a human feeding beast, and an immortality disease. Later exposition also makes clear that they are all treated as more dangerous than the chimera ants, with avoidance and containment described as the best available countermeasure. What humanity wanted from those journeys is equally important. The Dark Continent is not only a realm of horrors, it is also a realm of impossible abundance. The expeditions were drawn by promises like nitro rice, the herb for all illnesses, the Trinity elixir, unmanned rock, and medallion. That combination is part of the arc's sophistication. The outside world is not evil. It is simply far beyond the scale at which human appetite can remain clean. The same place that may hold unparalleled nourishment or medicine may also force a calamity home as the price of reaching for it. Beyond's earlier expedition embodies that bargain perfectly. He pursued the alchemical plant medallion through an unexplored route, succeeded in retrieving it, and still failed.
because the team lost its way on the return, and Sobe devastated the expedition. The plant died anyway. Survival narrowed to a handful of people, including a victim made grotesquely deathless by the disease. This is not merely a failed quest. It is the continent answering human intent with a lesson about scale, root, and consequence. There is another kind of key event hidden within the known world itself. The suggestion that the Dark Continent is not fully outside after all. The manga confirms that Nanika is a Dark Continent creature inhabiting Alaka under unknown circumstances. At the same time, later fan analysis and wiki discussion often connect Nanika to I because of shared imagery and behaviour, but that connection remains inferential rather than explicitly finalised in manga canon. For production, that means you can responsibly mention Nanika as a known world echo of the outside, while treating any direct equation with I as suggestive, not settled. This is where the Dark Continent reveals its most frightening property. Its danger is not merely that it contains stronger enemies. It contains things that do not fit the social, biological, or heroic grammar the known world depends on. The calamities are not just lethal, they are distorting. They make human institutions sound defensive and embarrassed, like governments trying to keep order after being shown proof that their categories were never large enough. That atmosphere is more powerful than any one fight scene could be. So when you narrate this section, do not rush through the calamities like a monster manual. Let each one feel like a sealed archive drawer being opened in dim light. Let the listener feel the administrative dread, the glass, the labels, the silence in the room, the sense that civilization's most honest voice here is not triumph, but careful containment. If the Dark Continent is the great outer pressure of the arc, then the characters around it become different kinds of human responses to that pressure. Jing is the purest appetite for Horizon in the series. Long before the public expedition politics fully form, he already treats the outside world as the next truthful thing. What he says on the world tree is important not only because it introduces the continent, but because it reveals his internal rhythm. He is never satisfied by what is directly in front of him, and he does not experience that restlessness as a flaw. He experiences it almost as identity itself. That makes him the ideal Dark Continent character, because the continent is defined not only by danger, but by the refusal to let the questing mind close. Beyond Netero is the opposite pole. If Jing is hunger, beyond is will. He does not simply yearn toward the frontier. He organizes it, weaponizes it, publicizes it, and builds decades of preparation around it. His relationship to the continent contains inheritance, ego, logistics, secrecy, and defiance all at once. He is the kind of man who hears a prohibition and begins constructing the road that will outlast the prohibition maker. That is why his presence changes the tone of every room he enters. He makes the Dark Continent feel less like a dream and more like an engineered inevitability. Isaac Netero stands behind both men like a measured absence. The Dark Continent deepens him retrospectively because it suggests that the man who spent his life pursuing worthy challenge had already reached a place where challenge ceased to flatter the self. His later stance toward the continent is not simple fear, and not ordinary caution either. It is closer to respect, sharpened by bitter knowledge. He knows the outside world is not a tournament bracket. He knows that some scales of danger do not dignify the warrior by meeting him as an equal. Don Freaks is the most dreamlike figure in the whole cluster of lore. He is less a person in the current story than a gravitational legend. What makes him powerful is not action on the page, but implication. One human being may have walked the shoreline of the impossible 3 centuries ago, written about it, vanished into it, and perhaps never returned because he never stopped moving. In a story so attentive to hunters, Don becomes the impossible extreme of the hunting instinct, the explorer turned into rumour, not by death, but by duration. Then there are the people who bring the arc back down to human scale. Kurapika does not enter this whole movement because he dreams of the outer world in the way Jing does. He enters because the voyage intersects with his private wound. The 4th Prince of Kakin has scarlet eyes, and the ship becomes the path through which a personal grief must travel. Leorio joins the Zodiacs through Cheadle's invitation. These motives matter because they keep the story from becoming purely abstract. Even when the map opens onto the largest frontier in the series, human beings still board the threshold for reasons as intimate as grief, duty, study, debt, and unfinished vows. Cheadle and Steiner bring in a different and equally necessary emotion: bureaucratic dread. They are not dreamers of the horizon, yet the horizon now passes through their desks, committees, briefings, interviews, evidence rooms, and custody arrangements. Through them, the series shows that the unknown is not encountered only by adventurers. It is also encountered by administrators forced to translate annihilating facts into protocols, negotiations, and temporary political compromises. That is a very adult kind of fear, and it gives the Dark Continent material a texture unlike almost anything else in shonen manga. Together, these characters make the arc feel plural instead of monolithic. The same frontier can be obsession, duty, inheritance, rivalry, scholarship, warning, temptation, and grief, depending on who is looking at it. That is exactly what makes the Dark Continent feel so alive before it is even fully seen. It already exists inside people as motive. The deepest power of the Dark Continent is that it changes the meaning of exploration. Most adventure stories teach the listener that the unknown exists to reward
courage. Hunter x Hunter does something far more unsettling. It asks whether some unknowns exist not to reward us, but to resize us. The Dark Continent is not simply a larger map to finish filling in. It is the suggestion that human confidence was always built inside a protected bowl of existence, and that true scale begins where that protection ends. That is why the published story has been wise to linger at the threshold. In the material available so far, the Black Whale, the New Continent Framework, the succession tensions, and the administrative preparation all keep the story near the door, and that is dramatically fitting. Once a continent like this is fully domesticated on the page, some of its metaphysical dread is inevitably reduced. But while it remains partially withheld, the imagination keeps doing part of the work. The listener keeps hearing more beyond the page edge than even the visible panels can completely hold. So the closing movement of the ASMR script should not resolve the Dark Continent into a neat answer. It should let the outside remain outside. It should let the known world feel small again, but not in a hopeless way. There is tenderness in that smallness too. The harbour matters more once you know the sea is only a lake. The friendships, griefs, vows and small human motives matter more once you know how indifferent the outer scale can be. In that sense, the Dark Continent is not just the future of the plot. It is the hidden philosophy of the series. To be a hunter is not merely to win, or to collect, or to reach a finish line. It is to keep moving toward what exceeds you, and to accept that sometimes the most honest discovery is not power, but proportion. So imagine at the end the ship still moving in dark water under a sky without fixed horizon. Imagine the known world behind it, still lit, still named, still full of ordinary lives. Imagine the vast outer land ahead, not calling, not welcoming, not threatening in any human voice at all, simply existing with the patience of geological time. And in that silence, let the final feeling be neither triumph nor dread alone, but reverence. Because beyond the shore of every secure map, there is always the possibility of a world that does not need our categories, and yet still changes us the moment we learn it is there. The Dark Continent is that possibility given shape. It is the beautiful humiliation of scale. It is the frontier that turns ambition into humility, knowledge into rumour, survival into legend, and stories into invitations that may also be warnings. And somewhere
somewhere beyond the safe basin of ordinary life, beyond the first tree, beyond the false sea, beyond the last treaty, and beyond the ship that carries so many private motives toward a shared dark horizon. The unfinished part of the world remains exactly what it has always been, older than our maps, wider than our courage, and still waiting for language strong enough to survive